Christmas Day, 1914. Dearest Mother, I am writing this in the trenches in my dugout. With a wood fire going and plenty of straw, it's rather cosy, although it's freezing hard and real Christmas weather. I think I've seen one of the most extraordinary sights today that anyone has ever seen. About 10 o'clock this morning I was peeping over the parapet when I saw a German, waving his arms, and presently two of them got out of their trenches and came toward ours. We were just going to fire on them when we saw that they had no rifles, so one of our men went out to meet them, and in about 2 minutes the ground between the two lines of trenches was swarming with men and officers of both sides, shaking hands and wishing each other a happy Christmas. This continued for about half an hour, when most of the men were ordered back to the trenches. For the rest of the day nobody has fired a shot, and the men have been wandering about at will over the top of the parapet and carrying straw and firewood about in the open. We've also had joint burial parties with a service for some dead, some German and some ours, who were lying out between the lines. Some of our officers were taking pictures of English and German soldiers. This extraordinary truce has been quite impromptu. There was no previous arrangement, and of course it had been decided that there was not to be any cessation of hostilities. I went out myself and shook hands with several of their officers and men. From what I gathered, most of them would be as glad to get home again as we should. We've had our pipes playing all day, and everyone has been wandering about in the open, unmolested, but not as far, of course, as the enemy's lines. The truce will go on until someone is foolish enough to let off his rifle. We nearly messed it up this afternoon by one of our fellows letting off his rifle skywards by mistake. But they did not seem to notice, so it did not matter. I've been taking advantage of the truce to improve my dugout, which I share with D. McBain, the Scotch Rugger International, an excellent fellow. We put on a proper roof this morning, and now we've got a tiled fireplace and brushwood and straw on the floor. We leave the trenches tomorrow, and I shan't be sorry to go, as it's much too cold to be pleasant at nights. 27th of December. I'm writing this back in the billets. Yesterday we had another party with the Germans in the middle. We exchanged cigarettes and autographs, and some people took photos. I don't know how long it will go on for. I believe it was supposed to stop yesterday, but we can hear no firing going on along the front today, except a little distant shelling. We are, at any rate, having another truce on New Year's Day, as the Germans want to see how the photos come out. Yesterday was lovely in the morning, and I went for some quite long walks about the lines. It's difficult to realise what that means, but of course, in the ordinary way, there's not a sign of life above ground, and anyone who puts their head up gets shot at. I don't suppose it happened everywhere along the line, although I think that indiscriminate firing was more or less stopped in most places on Christmas Day. It really is extraordinary that this sort of thing should happen in a war in which there is so much bitterness and ill feeling. The Germans in this part of the line are certainly sportsmen, if they're nothing else. Captain Alfred Dugan-Chater of the 28th Battalion, London Regiment. Another officer wrote home to his family in Manchester. Last night we moved back into our old trenches. I got in very late, but I had to go round, which I always do, but did so more especially because the next day was Christmas Day and I wanted to see the state of our trenches throughout our section. Had it not been freezing, they would have been awful, but as it was just freezing, the top crust was comforting, but in places one nearly sunk up to one's knees in mud. At 11 p.m. on December 24 there was absolute peace, bar a little sniping and a few rounds from a machine gun, and then no more. The King was sung, and then you heard, "Tomorrow is Christmas, if you don't fight, we won't." And the answer came back, "All right." One officer met a Bavarian, smoked a cigarette, and had a talk with him about halfway between the lines. Then a few men fraternised in the same way, and really, today, peace has existed. Men have been talking together, and they had a football match with a bully beef tin, and one man went over and cut a German's hair. Another letter, received in East Finchley, and printed in the London Evening News. I will tell you about a thing I couldn't imagine happening until it did. We've actually met the Germans halfway between our trenches and exchanged cigarettes, buttons, etc. On Christmas Eve we were shouting across to each other, "A Merry Christmas," etc. And they shouted, "Don't shoot until New Year's Day," and all that. On Christmas morning it was a bit foggy and there was no shooting. We got out the back and had a game of rounders. Getting tired of this, we got out the front and started wandering over to the Germans. When the mist cleared a bit, we saw that the Germans were doing the same thing, of course unarmed. We got so close that 5 of us and 5 of them met and had a talk. They nearly all talked English. After dinner, nearly all our boys went out and found the Germans had also turned up in force, and the result was a huge mixed crowd of men, swapping buttons and cigarettes, etc. Then some German officers came up and actually took our photos, all sitting on the ground. I wouldn't have missed the experience of yesterday for the most gorgeous Christmas dinner in England. A letter home from a German soldier was published in the journal Vorwärts, which is translated here. Suddenly, from the enemy, hurrahing was heard, and surprised we came from our mouse holes and saw the English advancing toward us, waving cigarette boxes, handkerchiefs and towels. They had no rifles with them, and therefore we knew it could only be a greeting and that it was all right. We advanced toward them about halfway. We were only about 200 metres from each other. The greeting took place in the presence of officers from both sides. Cigarettes, cigars and many other things were exchanged, and even snapshots of both sides were taken. The English began playing with a football they had with them. On darkness descending, both sides returned to their drawing rooms, having promised that for the next 3 days of the holidays they would not fire on each other. This promise was given as a word of honour and extended on both sides to the artillery as well as the cavalry and the infantry. We were able to move about the whole of Christmas Day with absolute freedom. It is only a pity that it was not a decisive peace. An officer in the Highland Regiment writes, "You need not have pitied us on Christmas Day. I've seldom spent a more entertaining one, despite the curious conditions. We were in the trenches and the Germans began to make merry on Christmas Eve, shouting at us to come out and meet them. They sang songs, very well. Our men answered by singing 'Who were you with last night?' and of course 'Tipperary,' very badly. I was horrified at discovering some of our men had actually gone out, imbued more with the idea of seeing the German trenches than anything else. They met halfway, and there ensued the giving of cigarettes and receiving cigars, and they arranged, the private soldiers of one army and the private soldiers of the other, a 48 hours armistice. It was all most irregular, but the Peninsula and other wars will furnish many such examples. Eventually, both sides were induced to return to their respective trenches, but the enemy sang all night, and during my watch they played Home Sweet Home and God Save the King at 2:30 a.m. It was rather wonderful. The night was clear and cold and frosty, and across to our lines at this usually miserable hour of night came the sound of such tunes, very well played, especially by a man with a cornet, who's probably well known. Christmas Day was very misty, and out came those Germans to wish us a happy day. We went out and told them we were at war with them, and that really they must play the game and pretend to fight. They went back, but again attempted to come toward us, so we fired over their heads, and they fired a shot back to show they understood. And the rest of the day passed quietly in this part of the line. But in others a deal of fraternising went on, so there you are, all this talk of hate, all this fury at each other that has raged since the beginning of the war, quelled and stayed by the magic of Christmas. Indeed, one German said, "But you're of the same religion as us, and today is the day of peace." It really is a great triumph for the Church. It is a great hope for future peace when two great nations, hating each other as foes have seldom hated, sides vowing eternal hate and vengeance, and setting their venom to music, should, on Christmas Day, for all that the word implies, lay down their arms, exchange smokes, and wish each other happiness. Beyond all this, the day itself was rendered impossible for war by mist, so altogether I expect we had a better time than all you poor things at home, who were probably bothering your heads thinking of the chances of war and the discomfort of the trenches. Next year, pray God, we'll all be round the fire and at peace. So we've arrived at the end of this Advent Calendar series. Thank you most warmly for watching. I hope you found something to enjoy in some of the various episodes. I wish you a very happy Christmas, which is my custom and tradition, but whatever you're celebrating at this time, or if you're not celebrating anything at all, whoever and wherever you are, whatever you believe or don't believe, I wish you all good health, great happiness, prosperity, and most of all, peace.